And the quantity that's going to move through the market, percentage-wise, is going to be much smaller. It's going to move from Q1 to Q2, where this is the new equilibrium, this is the old equilibrium. So, under the conditions that I specified, this means that the total amount of crime is going to increase by this rectangle here that stretches from P1 to P2 all the way over to Q2. So this is going to be the increase in crime-related activities to underwrite the increase in total spending on drugs. Now, that's one governmental policy that has these unintended consequences. A second policy is instead for the government to be actively engaged in education. And here, the focus is on the demand side. What can be done to inform the population about the consequences of using drugs, cocaine, I won't use marijuana, cocaine, what are the others, meth, what are some of the others, meth, and what else? Pardon me? Marijuana should be legal, so that's why I'm not going to use that as an example. Anyway, so you've got these illegal drugs out there. Now what you're trying to do is educate people about what's going to happen to the quality of their lives if they become addicted, right? And some portion of the population actually listens to you and pays attention. And when that happens, now we don't have a shift in the supply function. Instead, we have a shift in the demand function. And what this supply-demand analysis tells us is that now both the price and the quantity fall. Hence, if the price falls, there's less in the way of profits and rents that are going to be generated by the drug lords, right, than there was in the case of the control on the supply side. We have prices falling here from P1 to P2, the quantity falling from Q1 to Q2, and as a result, we end up with a new value of the drug-related crime, which is much less than it was before. Right? A decrease in total spending on drugs and in drug-related crime. Right? Okay, so those are two events, both of which are sourced with different policy interventions on the part of government trying to change the incentives that would otherwise exist in the private market for illegal drugs. Okay, let's turn to the price elasticity of supply. And the mechanics are exactly the same, except now we have an upward sloping curve, not a downward sloping curve. So the elasticity, the absolute value will be the same as the measure of the elasticity because there's a positive relationship between quantity and price, while in the demand case there was a negative relationship. Okay, so here we want to measure how quantity supplied responds to a change in price. Same arithmetic formula, percentage change in quantity supplied now relative to a percentage change in price. And exactly as the same on the demand side, what we're measuring now is the seller's price sensitivity. How responsive are sellers to a change in price? Will it motivate them to offer more quantity in the market? Less quantity is going to turn on how sensitive they are to price changes. And once again, we'll use the midpoint method given that we're looking at arc elasticities. Okay, example. A price rise of 8%, and we look at what the quantity response is as reflected and embedded in the supply curve. There's a price rise of 16%. So right away we know what the elasticity is, right? And it turns out to be the same number. Orange, I'm sorry, I don't know your first name. Yeah, Gabe, same story, right? Exactly the same number. Huh? Wait? Yeah. Same number. So your number works in all seasons. 2. That's ridiculous. That's here. So it's 2. All right. Okay, there's, like on the demand side, we have the same 5 buckets. We got perfectly inelastic supply, we got perfectly elastic supply, and we've got those 3 intervening supply curves as well. Once again, the flatter the curve, the bigger the elasticity. The steeper the curve, the smaller the elasticity. It's exactly the same. 5 different classifications, and I'll go through these very quickly because it's a repeat of what we did on the demand side. But quite obviously, the interpretation and what lies behind these curves in terms of seller behavior or firms supplying goods to the market is much different on the supply side as it is on the demand side. Right? Okay, so perfectly inelastic, as before, a price rise of 10% results in no change in the quantity response, and thus the price elasticity is 0. Inelastic, perfectly inelastic. So this would be an instance where there is a manufacturer supplying a particular product, and that manufacturer doesn't care what the price is. They're going to offer to the market the same quantity each and every month. Okay, inelastic. Go through the same process. Price rises by 10%. The quantity rises by less than 10%, and thus we have an inelastic but not a perfectly inelastic demand curve to distinguish this bucket from the prior bucket. Unit elastic, going through the same process. Price rises by 10%. The quantity must rise by the same percentage if we're going to have a unit elastic result of 1. Elastic, now there's much greater sensitivity than there was in any of the prior examples. Prices rise by 10%. The quantity rises by much more than 10%, and thus we have a measure of elasticity that's greater than 1. Right? And then finally, no, that is finally. Oh no, perfectly elastic. Same story that we had on the demand side. It's horizontal, and as a result, there is no price change. If there is, the quantity will fall to 0. But with that percentage change of 0, you can get any percentage change in quantity, and thus, once again, you have a supply curve that has an infinite elasticity. Okay? And this would be an instance where the sellers are very sensitive to price. And moreover, think about this for a moment. I don't expect this to be intuitively obvious to you at this point, but it will become obvious to you later. If you have a seller in a marketplace that is a price taker, he offers whatever quantity or she offers whatever quantity to the market based on the price that's given to them. What is their view of the elasticity of demand that they face? Yes? Perfectly elastic, right? Because if they change the price a little bit, they won't sell anything, right? If they raise it a little, they'll either, if they raise, I'm sorry, let me restate that. If they raise it just a bit above P1, P2, there'll be no demand for their product. If they decrease it below P1, P2, everybody will rush to them. Okay? Anyway, just keep that in mind for later analysis that we'll be conducting. Okay, determines the supply elasticity. Going through the same process we did before, let's look at a concrete example. Let's look at the supply of beachfront property versus the supply of new cars. And we recognize right up front that beachfront property is a much scarcer resource, and generally a non-renewable resource, right, than the manufacture and production of new cars. And what we want to do is, what is the effect, for this particular example, what is the effect of supply elasticity if, for example, there's some shift in demand that takes place. And moreover, just as we noted on the demand side, the price elasticity for supply is going to be much greater in the long run than in the short run, because firms or sellers get the opportunity to adjust, end up acquiring more resources, more financing with regard to debt capital, whatever. Okay, let's look at a concrete example. This new cars versus beachfront property. The event is that population has grown, which causes the demand for both goods to double. Okay? In other words, the demand for each price is going to be twice as large as it was initially. So if you think about that for a moment, that means that the demand curve is not going to be a parallel shift. That's a sidebar. The real critical point is what happens with regard to these two types of goods when this event takes place. For which of the products will the price change the most? And for which of the product will the Q change the most? You can visit with your neighbors, give it some thought, and then we're going to ask you to explain, somebody to explain it to us with regard to what the outcome is. Hey, by the way, you can ask Sam. Okay, any volunteers? No. We need more equity. We need more equity. Somebody that hasn't volunteered. Yes. Yes, for the beach. The price will change the most for beach. Yes.
And for quantity.
More. Yeah. Right. Does everybody agree with that? And I'm sorry. Can she certainly can. Louder and more forcefully. Because it's the right answer. Skip right out there.
The quantity of cars will go up more, the price of beachfront property will go up.
And the reason is?
There's a limited supply of beachfront property, so the demand's going to go up, but there's no limit on supply first.
She's exactly correct. Okay, this is beachfront property. Its supply function is very inelastic, certainly relative to the manufacture of automobiles, right? So if I have a doubling of the population, this demand is going to shift out, as I indicated, in a non-parallel way, and that's because I said the demand is going to double for each and every price, right? And when I look here at what is the new equilibrium, it's going to be P2 with this quantity Q2, and the story that unfolds with regard to automobiles is dramatically different, and it's different only for this example because of the supply elasticity. In particular, this is new cars. Here, we've got a much more elastic supply schedule. And once again, given the event, the doubling of demand at each and every price, we end up with a much larger increase in quantity, as you suggested, but not nearly the same increase in price as we discovered for beachfront property. Okay? So anyway, that is the result of this comparison. Okay, the price elasticity of supply, how can it vary? Much the same as looking at the demand equation. There, we had a linear demand equation. Now, we have a nonlinear supply equation. And the fundamental point is that supply, as I move along that curve, becomes increasingly less elastic as quantity rises. And the major reason is that there are capacity limitations, or there are resource limitations to sellers being able to scale up, certainly in the short run. So as a result, you would expect them to be less responsive to prices for larger quantities than they are for smaller quantities. So looking at this example here that I've graphed, this particular move here at the lower quantity levels, namely from 100 to 200, and if we measure this supply elasticity, it's elastic over this range. Namely, it's greater than 1. If I move to higher levels of scale or quantity that's being offered to the marketplace, then it turns out that my responsiveness is much less price sensitive, and that is reflected in the elasticity measure, which is less than 1. Okay? Sure. Got it? Okay. So, other elasticities to keep in mind. We talked about variables that shift the demand function, and there are a number of variables that we isolated in the last lecture. 2 of those principal variables are income, and secondly, substitutable or complementary goods. Income elasticity, just like the price elasticity, now we're measuring the percentage change in quantity relative to a percentage change in income. If that is a positive elasticity, we have a normal good. If it's a negative elasticity, then it turns out we have an inferior good. Right? Okay, continuing on. Cross-price elasticity of demand. Likewise here, it's going to turn out that the sign on the cross-price elasticity of demand is going to be different for a substitute than it is for a complement. Specifically, the measure is the percentage change in the quantity demanded for good 1 relative to the percentage change in the price for some other good, which we're labeling here as good 2. For substitutes, if the two goods, good 1 and good 2, are substitutes, then this cross-price elasticity will be positive. An example here that I have, an increase in the price of beef causes an increase in the demand for chicken. If they're complements, however, the cross-price elasticity will be negative. In one of our examples that we discussed in the last lecture, an increase in the price of computers causes a decrease in the demand for software. Right? Now you know everything you need to know about elasticities. And we're going to use them again and again in our analysis. And to summarize very quickly, we've explained elasticities measure responsiveness. We know how to measure the price elasticity. We know the difference between inelastic and elastic measures. And those same kind of separation or decompositions exist with regard to supply as well. Thank you.